everyone. This week we're going to compare social entrepreneurship to cultural entrepreneurship and focus a little bit on the larger global dynamics of social entrepreneurship. Patricia Gonzalez, who works for Cultura and specifically works with Filipino cultural entrepreneurs, in an article titled "The Value That Culture Adds to Entrepreneurship," includes this graphic. Gonzalez argues that all entrepreneurs create use value and economic value, are innovative, seek and maximize profits, are alert to emergent opportunities, take and manage risks, engage in strategic thinking and organizing, are leaders and are dedicated. Further, though, she notes that social entrepreneurs create social value through their work and are visionary in their orientation. They're also catalysts for social change. And to all this, cultural entrepreneurs add explicit cultural value, which might be educational, symbolic, spiritual, social, communal, historic, political, and more. Let's break these distinctions down a bit further and first talk about social entrepreneurship. Pravin Vise, a professor at the Guru Nanak Institute of Engineering and Technology, distinguishes social entrepreneurship from capital or business entrepreneurship by arguing that social entrepreneurship focuses on things like trying to make the world a better place to live in, focusing more on the greater good, engaging in projects that may or may not generate economic income, investing time and energy in changing society with potentially not much in return, finding gaps and creating ventures to serve the underserved markets. And in this context, profit isn't the key driving motive or purpose, but rather social change and social good is. The Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship offers a definition of social entrepreneurship, but more interestingly, I think they offer a list of characteristics. And the Schwab Foundation claims that social entrepreneurs are people who seek to achieve large-scale, systemic, sustainable social change through a new invention, a different approach. One of the things I hope you take from this class and from the work we're doing is that not all change has to be large-scale. Entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs also engage in small, potent gestures that can have big ripple effects, but Schwab argues that social entrepreneurs aim for big change. They also focus on the social and ecological value creation, perhaps more than financial. They innovate by finding a new product, a new service, a new approach to a social problem. Social entrepreneurs continuously refine and adapt their approaches. They're innovative, act sustainably, think constantly about their reach, and aim for social impact. And social entrepreneurs combine the characteristics represented by Richard Branson and Mother Teresa. Richard Branson's key characteristics are that he's determined, and if you've ever read a biography piece about him, you see that. He's passionate, he's engaged in what he does, he perseveres when problems arrive. He has personality, he's extroverted, agreeable, conscientious, enthusiastic, and warm. He's flexible in his approaches. Mother Teresa is remembered and cherished as a person who was caring and selfless, strong, incisive, and persuasive. She spoke up for others. She was also idealistic in nature, but pragmatic in action. Someone who combines some of these traits and is often pointed to as an example of social entrepreneurship is Blake Mycoskie, the founder and chief shoe giver of Tom's Shoes. Mycoskie was stunned when he found out that many people, especially in developing countries, don't have shoes. He met a woman who worked with a volunteer group that held shoe drives in the U.S. to collect and send shoes to people in need, and eventually he formed and built Tom's, a one-for-one company. When you buy a product is donated to someone in need. And we'll read more about Mycoskie's story later in class. An example of a person that innovated the social entrepreneurship landscape is Muhammad Yunus, and you're going to read a chapter from his book this week. He began his work in the 1970s when he realized that poor people were completely restricted from loans and financing that banks were offering, and that very small loans could make a huge impact on people's, especially women's, lives in developing countries. Yunus started microfinancing programs where small loans can make a huge difference for individuals. These aren't gifts or charitable donations. They're loans that are repaid. One of the really compelling arguments Yunus makes in the chapter we'll read this week is that when things fall apart, we can redesign, we recast, and rebuild. We should not miss the opportunity to convert our financial institutions into inclusive institutions. Nobody should be refused access to financial services. These services are so vital for people's self-realization. I feel credit should be given the status of a human right. And Grameen Bank is the microfinancing bank that Yunus created that now serves more than 8 million borrowers, too poor for traditional banks to take them seriously. Grameen Bank and Yunus recently won a Nobel Prize for this work. A more slippery concept is that of cultural entrepreneurship. There's a lot more research and examples about social entrepreneurship. I would argue that cultural entrepreneurship is in part ways of leveraging arts and culture to enhance an area economically. Recently, Sweden became the first country to adopt a typeface, a font. Most countries have a national flag, an anthem, a bird. These things serve to help anchor the country's unique national identity. But more and more countries have turned toward the business practice of branding and used it to culturally brand their unique aspects and elements. And this is a fascinating example of a business practice being put to work in terms of cultural entrepreneurship. In this context, the entire culture or country is the entrepreneurial initiative. Most countries want to attract businesses, artists, and national recognition. Sweden has adopted a particularly smart strategy for anchoring its world identity. Along with a specific font face, Sweden has also adopted a color scheme. And this color scheme and typography is used for their websites, press releases, tourism brochures, and more. If Sweden succeeds, when people see these colors together, or they see this particular font, people will immediately think Sweden. Companies are really good at branding. Arts and cultural industries typically aren't, but communities and cities can embrace their cultural industries to anchor their identity, and a great example of this is Art Prize in Grand Rapids. Art Prize is, as the organizers describe it, a radically open, independently organized international art competition for 19 days every fall, 3 miles of downtown Grand Rapids. Become an open playing field where anyone can find a voice in the conversation about what art is and why it matters. The art is everywhere in the city during these 2 weeks. It's absolutely amazing. The grand prize winner of the public vote and the artwork that tied for jurors' grand prize in 2014 was Anila Quantum Aga's piece, Intersection. Aga described her goals of the project as inviting viewers to confront the contradictory nature of intersections and boundaries. She talked about the piece being influenced by exclusion as a woman, not having access to the space of community and creativity of the mosque. This year's winner of the $200,000 Art Prize, Jurors Grand Prize, was Sati Jones's Heartside Community Meal. More than 250 people ate a meal together in this art installation. And the purpose was threefold, as Satan Jones, the artist, described it. To remind us of food rituals as culturally anchored but shared. That food exposes our differences and inequities and illuminates our similarities and connections. And the meal was just part of the experience. People who participated also engaged in conversations of healthy food access, which is a significant social and cultural issue. Art Prize 9 just happened in October in Grand Rapids. It serves to anchor the city as a cultural capital and brings together hundreds of thousands of people around public art. It's a great example of a city and community engaged in cultural entrepreneurship. I want to head to Nebraska for one last example of cultural entrepreneurship. 2 years ago, MSU invited back Andrew and Angie Norman. Andrew is an MSU alum, and together the two of them founded and run Hear Nebraska. Hear Nebraska is what I would consider to be a hybrid cultural organization. It's a nonprofit organization, but it's also one that leverages entrepreneurial ideas to make cultural change. The vision of Hear Nebraska is to make the state a globally recognized cultural designation, and they do this work by highlighting Nebraska artists, venues, and arts organizations. They run a radio site, they produce and promote music events across the state.
The Nebraska we see is full of life.
It's full of energy.
It's full of creativity.
It's full of passion.
It's full of hardworking people
Who want to close their eyes sometimes and connect with something greater than themselves.
Sometimes that comes in a church.
Sometimes it's in a field.
And sometimes it's amid a sweaty crowd, biting their lips, raising their fist to a musician.
who traveled from across the country
Across the world.
or across the street to perform original art at a Nebraska venue.
But what really gets us excited is the creative energy in the state.
It's the ability to surround oneself with brewers and chefs,
developers, designers, songwriters and poets,
farmers and carpenters,
who are all driven to create something original, something uniquely them.
We produce events that bring together people across disciplines, races, ages, and sexes
to experience something new and always something surprising.
And we have our finger on the pulse of the young people who are deciding whether they should make a life somewhere else
or stay and make that life here.
We don't know what you see when you picture Nebraska, but we know what we see.
At Hear Nebraska, we work our asses off to make sure the rest of the world sees it too.
Join us.
And two of their other key activities are to help to build a more positive, inclusive, creative cultural community and to document and preserve critical Nebraska cultural history, providing access to a wider audience. Cultural entrepreneurship is obviously culturally situated and framed. Cultural entrepreneurship. But social entrepreneurship is also culturally situated and framed. Any social entrepreneurial project is engaged within an area, a community, a culture. Any project has to attend to the cultural and often global dynamics at play. Honestly, we could spend 7 weeks just starting to talk about the cultural and global dynamics of social entrepreneurship. So we're really skipping across the surface of these big issues. And I think this week's readings will help. For week 2, we're going to read a groundbreaking article by Courtney Martin and Lisa Witter, in which they initially argued for a distinction between social and cultural entrepreneurship. Then we'll read a short chapter by Nancy Roof, where she describes the growing global attention and awareness of today's social entrepreneurship and enterprise projects. Our next reading for week 2 is by Muhammad Yunus, who I mentioned earlier. We'll read a chapter called Social Business, From Dream to Reality. We have one case, and our case for this week is an MSU case, as most of them will be. I mentioned it last week, and it's called Snares to Wares. It's a fascinating project. We have one spark, a Sarah McLachlan video for her song World on Fire. It's innovative in that rather than spend a ton of money hiring a crew and setting up a stage and then filming and editing and doing post-production for a music video, McLachlan, her husband, and a graphic designer friend of theirs who work for free created a piece informing us of how they decided to spend the money instead. This week, as we consider cultural entrepreneurship in the larger global context, you're going to continue working on your Project One website. If you haven't started yet, you're behind. Review the assignment carefully and get working. I'm going to send out this week and post to detail my grading rubric for Project One so you can see what I'm going to be looking for in your projects. This should help you prep to turn your work in by noon this Sunday, May 27th. If you have any questions at all about our week 2 work or about your Project One website, email me and let me know.